This week on Nevada Week, short-term rental properties in Clark County face new rules that have some owners and operators fighting back.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstedt and additional supporting sponsors.
Welcome to Nevada Week. I'm Amber Renee Dixon. For several years, Clark County banned short-term rental properties in the county's unincorporated areas outside of cities like Las Vegas and Henderson. But last year, the state legislature passed a law requiring Clark County to begin regulating the popular industry that provides tourists different accommodation options outside of hotels. The Clark County Commission recently approved an ordinance with new rules for short-term rentals available on platforms like Airbnb and VRBO, and one of those rules caps the number of properties that can be licensed as short-term rentals at 1% of all housing in unincorporated Clark County. According to the county, that equates to about 2,850 properties, which will receive their licenses through a lottery system. Meanwhile, the county estimates that there are between 6,000 and 12,000 short-term rentals in unincorporated Clark County right now. Local short-term rental owner Victor Paulo does not like his chances of getting that coveted license.
Well, welcome. This is one of my short-term rentals.
Victor Paulo says he owns and operates 4 short-term rentals in southern Nevada. This property,
5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, really nice swimming pool.
Is one of 2 he has in unincorporated Clark County.
It started about 5 years ago. I separated from my 9-to-5 job and I wanted to pursue my career in real estate sales, and I needed something to keep me afloat in the meantime. I only had about 4 months worth of savings to stay afloat, so it was a very scary time for me. And I used Airbnb to extend that time in order for me to get my experience in and pursue my career.
Airbnb became part of his career, which is now at stake due to the short-term rental regulations Clark County revealed in June. The county's licensing process includes a lottery that will significantly reduce the number of short-term rentals allowed to legally exist in the county.
With Clark County, they have a very similar regulations than most of the other ones. They focus a lot on guest safety with fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide, smoke detectors, and things like that, which is great. What differentiates them is that they are only allowing about 25% of the current Airbnbs that are up on the market to be permitted. So it's going to be put into some kind of lottery, and you basically have a 25% chance of getting a permit, even if you've done everything up to code to what they want.
If you are not chosen in that Clark County lottery, what will that mean for you and your business?
That would be devastating, to be honest, yeah. So I would have to have about 16 to 18 people that work for me, that maids, maintenance people, landscapers, and things like that, and those people would be out of a job.
And how are you preparing for that possibility of not being selected?
Thought about maybe moving to a different market where Airbnb is more appreciated, and possibly with the current ones, possibly moving them to midterm or long-term investments.
That means Paulo would look to buy property in places like Florida and Mexico, where he says there are less regulations on short-term rentals, while turning this house into a less profitable long-term rental.
It is more bang for your buck. You know, you get more monthly with a short-term rental,
which he says would impact the livelihoods of more people than just himself. Joining us to further discuss the implications of Clark County's short-term rental ordinance are Jackie Flores with the Greater Las Vegas Short-Term Rental Association, which opposed some of the new regulations, as well as Beth Blackwood with Nevadans for the Common Good, which supported the county's regulation efforts. We did ask Clark County to be a part of today's panel, but the county did not provide a representative. Ladies, thank you both for being here. Before we get into this discussion, tell me each a little bit more about the organization you represent. Jackie, I'll start with you.
The Greater Las Vegas Short-Term Rental Association is a nonprofit organization, and it's made up of individual property owners who have short-term rentals here in Southern Nevada.
When did that start?
We started that association about 2.5 years ago.
Okay. And Beth, Nevadans for the Common Good.
Nevadans for the Common Good is an organization of organizations. We have about 40 member institutions. These are churches, synagogues, teacher representation, local nonprofits, and our purpose is to listen to the concerns of the community and see where we can impact, either by working with local legislation or by telling our stories in order to improve the conditions for Southern Nevadans.
Let's start with the concerns from the people that you represent. What were they in regards to short-term rentals?
We held many listening sessions to hear about concerns that short-term rentals were impacting on local communities. And what came out of that was kind of two separate issues that overlapped. One of which was unregulated short-term rentals operating without any regulations were turning into difficult community situations. So you had party houses, you had weekend issues that created disruption in communities. But at the same time, we're hearing stories from many people in the community who were having difficulty either with incredibly rising rents or unavailable of accessible, affordable housing. And when you evaluated the number of unlicensed short-term rentals that were operating in our community, you recognize that that is impacting the number of units that are available for either long-term rentals or for people in our community to buy and live in.
And that is because these can be very lucrative for investors to come in, and they would reduce the housing supply by buying these properties and using them as short-term rentals. Do you want to respond to the party house aspect, Jackie?
Yes, we've always heard people referring to party houses. The problem with that is that they're labeling all of them as party houses, and the fact is that the vast majority of them are not. There are obviously some that do cause issues. We are aware of them, and we've always been asking, why isn't code enforcement or the police enforcing the regulations for nuisance that are already in place? And that's not happening. If they're in fact party houses, being out of control, they should be stopped, and Metro and code enforcement should stop them. But instead, they're going after houses that are not causing any issues at all, playing whack-a-mole, trying to find them, wasting their time, wasting taxpayer money to try to get to shut them down, when they're not causing any nuisance. So that's why we have a problem with the label of party houses. I understand that people try to vilify the industry in order to pass strict regulations, but you have to understand that you are mislabeling a lot of those people that are not in that type of business.
I completely respect what you're saying, and I know that a lot of short-term rentals are just being used for weekend rentals or even longer term, maybe a couple of weeks even at a time. And I do appreciate that not every short-term rental turns into a party house. Mm-hmm. The new ordinance, however, does limit the number of guests that are allowed in a house. That will help to reduce the opportunity for party houses, and also limits the number of units that are being taken out of our local housing availability for people that live in the community.
How fair is the system that the county set up, this lottery system that will significantly reduce how many people can legally operate? I'll ask you first.
Well,
Jack.
the lottery, we think it's something that should not have been used. When we were at the state legislature last year, we asked that those who were operating already should be the ones to get licenses first, and then implement all these different restrictions after that. Because if they have been operating this long, that means that they've been doing something really great. Because the platform itself is not going to keep you on the platform if you are a bad host.
But they have been operating illegally, technically.
They have.
So how do you gauge whether they have a history or not?
For example, Airbnb, for example, when somebody stays at a property, that guest reviews the host. You get 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, and then the host reviews the guest. If it's a bad guest, 1 star. If it's a great guest, 5 stars. So you have that system in place already that's kind of self-regulating itself, where you know which houses are doing great, which houses are clean, well-maintained, no issues, and which guests are also great guests to host versus the ones that are not. So, there is that. With a lottery system, you might get a bad host with a license.
This could be someone that just decides to start getting into the business now because there's this path to
Right.
licensing, whereas they have no experience
Exactly.
prior.
But the regulation now is going to require the platforms to be licensed and to adhere to the rules, and then they're going to have to monitor who's using these units and help to dissuade bad actors from participating in the program. The lottery is a fair system that allows everyone to participate, and at the time this regulation was that we started to investigate what was happening in the county, they estimated that there were 10,000 illegal units going on, across all kinds of platforms, not just the major ones like Airbnb and VRBO. Other platforms don't monitor things to the same extent that some of the larger ones do. We're short 80 to 100,000 units for people to live in here in our community. So limiting the number of Airbnbs means that we are, or the number of short-term rentals, means that we are opening up additional housing for people that want to purchase a home or for long-term rentals, people that live in the area and contribute to our community and to our tax base.
Well, but I think that's a misconception because, to think that just because you're going to not have licensed short-term rentals, that those are magically going to convert into affordable housing, that's not necessarily true. Rents are through the roof right now. It's not affordable for anyone, and it has nothing to do with Airbnb. Available units to purchase is also not an Airbnb problem or short-term rental problem. These short-term rentals have been operating for years before the pandemic, before this housing issue started. So, again, everybody seems to be blaming short-term rentals for every single thing that's happening here in the Valley, where it's affordable housing, which, by the way, a lot of the short-term rentals are not located in affordable housing areas at all. So that, that does not make sense. Houses to buy, again, when these houses go for sale, they're going to go up for the prices that are high right now. They're not going to go for sale for any lower than that.
Well, I happen to live downtown adjacent next to the medical district. A corporation came into my neighborhood and purchased 4 houses, all for the same price. That impacts my property value. It also takes away from available housing for people that might be attending the medical school or working in our local hospitals, working in our schools, working in our hospitality industry. It takes away the availability of all of that and just allows people to come into town and stay for the weekend and not contribute to our local community.
I think they actually do contribute. But going back to, just the housing prices, before we had the housing price issue, Airbnbs or short-term rentals were being accused of lowering property values. By having a short-term rental in the community, people that were opposing short-term rentals were claiming Airbnbs lower property values. Now they're being blamed for raising property values. So which is it? You can't have both happening. Now, as far as people coming to stay at short-term rentals, they do contribute to the local community. In fact, a lot of the small businesses in our neighborhoods are thankful that these guests who are coming to stay at short-term rentals are coming to town because they go and spend their money, in the local restaurants, in the local bars and grills, to the supermarkets. They do invest. All that tourism dollars are now going to our local community, not just on the Strip.
It's difficult when you have a city whose economic base is built off of hospitality and tourism. And yes, I can see the side of people coming in and contributing to the local economy that way, a huge part of our economy. But then you also have teachers out there who are struggling to afford a basic apartment. And that is such a need we have here in Clark County with the teacher shortage. Who do you think is the average short-term rental owner and operator? What is the profile? Could you even put it?
I can't even put it in words. We really support mom and pop owners being able to rent out their home or a vacation home, and that's part of this new ordinance, is that it's a single entity can own one property rather than a corporation or a investment firm coming in and operating multiple units. So, it's a combination of both, but the new ordinance is really going to support an individual owner, a mom and pop owner, taking advantage of, supplementing their income with a short-term rental, as opposed to a corporation that has multiple units, that's operating, that's not contributing to the local economy, not invested in our local communities. There's so many things are impacted by just having a home that's utilized on such a short basis, because then you don't have families living in those homes. You don't have kids attending school. You don't have, parents that are involved in community activities. So my hope is this ordinance will create a situation where individuals are taking advantage of the opportunity to operate a short-term rental, but we're not seeing large corporations invested in and operating multiple properties across the valley.
There are mom and pops, and then there are the corporations, and then there is someone like Victor in our package who has 4 properties in southern Nevada. Under this ordinance, with 2 of them being in unincorporated Clark County, he will have to get rid of one. And that was a specific part of this ordinance that went beyond what the state required, which was to allow 1 license per up to 5 properties. What did you think about the 1 license per property?
Yeah, obviously we are against that. Like I said, there's not just big corporations that buy multiple properties. I mean, we know some of our members, for example, are accountants, and they have 3 properties, not because they want to become millionaires or billionaires. They're doing that because that's what they need in order to be able to pay, afford the house that they live in, to be able to pay for their kids' education. There's people that are doing short-term renting because they need to pay for the high cost of prescription drugs. I mean, there's so many things that people need to pay for, that having 1 house is not enough. Sometimes they have to do 2 houses, and they take their life savings to do this. And they're not big corporations or big businesses that are doing this.
Do you consider those mom and pops?
I'm sorry, I don't. I think that if an accountant owns 3 houses and they're profiting off of short-term rentals, there needs to be more of a balance in how we invest in our community. And right now, available housing is at such a limited quantity, and it takes so long to build new units. And building new units now is so expensive. And additionally, you have neighborhoods that are fighting apartments in their neighborhood, being built close by. You've got people that don't want, multiple units built in their neighborhoods. We feel like everybody is caught in the crunch of where to live. An accountant that owns 3 houses that is making a good living, he could certainly rent 2 of his houses to long-term rentals and make a significant income off of that.
Not nearly as lucrative, though.
Not
as the
nearly as
short-term rental.
lucrative, of course not, and that's the whole issue.
But let's remember what just happened during the pandemic, where people were not working, were not able to pay rent. What happened to those property owners? Right? They could not collect rent, and they had to still keep those tenants there for months, and they were unable to collect rent. So what happens to them at that point? So there's risks to everything, and these people that have more than 1 home, again, they're not doing it to become millionaires, to become rich. They're doing it because that is the type of income that they need in order to be able to provide for their family.
I think to some extent they are doing it purely for profit, because right now it's estimated that a short-term rental can make $10,000 a month in Las Vegas. We're one of the highest profitability markets in the country for short-term rentals. And you know, somebody that owns multiple units that's making those kind of income, they are doing it for profit.
Some of the ordinance requirements, maximum of 10 people or 2 per bedroom, whichever one is less, I believe. Minimum 2-night stay for every reservation. One important distinction between Clark County's ordinance and, let's say, the city of Las Vegas is that the city of Las Vegas requires the owner of the property to occupy the property at the same time that it is being rented out. Clark County's ordinance does not. What did you think of that, Jackie?
Well, I mean, I think that they all should be allowed to get a license. You know, that's why City of Las Vegas is having issues on that respect over there, because they're only doing owner-occupied. And we even ask Clark County to exempt people that are doing home share. Those are people that live in the property and rent a room or 2. Because those are usually not the ones that are creating the, you know, the issues, you know, that most people talk about. Those people who live on the property, they're there to, monitor what's going on. And those are probably the people that need the money the most.
How often do you see that?
We estimate about 40% of the current short-term rentals are owner-occupied.
And perhaps this is something that you both agree on.
Yeah.
I certainly understand somebody renting a room and supplementing their income that way. That's understandable. At the same point in time, the county had to come up with some sort of a policy that they could, put into the ordinance, and we support, what they came up with.
In particular, what did you like about the ordinance?
We liked limiting the number of units available. We liked the 1,000-foot distance between units.
Which is different than what the state required.
Right, the state requirements were less.
Only 660
and,
feet.
we respect the fact that Clark County recognizes the needs of our local community, and the ordinance was written accordingly. For instance, they exempted Mount Charleston because of water and fire concerns and said no short-term rentals there. So local control and considering what our local community needs is an important part of the ordinance.
Why does that make such a big difference, the 1,000 feet between short-term rental properties and the 660 feet?
It provides diversity as far as the type of houses that are available for short-term rentals, that they're not all concentrated in a single type of community.
And why would you oppose that?
Well, I mean, again, it just makes no sense. Why not 2,000? Why not 500? There's no rhyme and reason with. This is the problem with the county ordinance. They came up with so many things that have no common sense at all. They just came up with numbers and just threw it out there. 660 was the minimum that was required by the state. That's what we were supporting, and it just allows more people to be able to get licensed. Clark County is going to have a big problem when they issue 2,800 or 2,400 licenses. What's going to happen with the other ones? If they think that they're going to shut down, that's not going to happen. People still have to pay bills. People still have to, take care of their families, and that problem is not going to go away.
How well do you anticipate this to be enforced? The county is going to get its enforcement budget from the licenses, which are collected annually, those fees, non-refundable inspection fees, non-refundable application fees, and then if there are ordinance violations, they'll be getting that money, but boy, they have to start this from the ground up.
Enforcement is going to be an ongoing concern, and that is something that the county is going to have to figure out how they're going to enforce that.
Because what does any of this even matter if it can't be enforced?
Right. And she said earlier, all the nuisance laws and regulations are already in the book. Why not enforce them? That's what we've been saying all along. For years, we've been asking them to legalize short-term rentals, give licenses so they could be regulated and pay taxes. And they have been opposed to all this for years. And now they're rushing to put this together, and that's why we have this horrible ordinance, because they're rushing it to the last minute.
I don't think they rushed. They put out a survey that had over 6,000 responses. They held town halls. We held public actions with different commissioners. They listened to our concerns, and they took those into effect when they wrote the ordinance.
But they didn't listen to the concerns of the short-term rental people. And that's the problem, because if anybody knows anything about short-term rentals, it's those operators.
Those operators have been operating illegally, so evidently they don't care about ordinance.
But still, they were operating successfully, because if you figure 10 to 12,000 short-term rentals operating every single day, that means we would have complaints every single day about short-term rentals. When did you hear about a party house that got out of control over the weekend? No. Last weekend? No. All this month? No. So that means that they have been doing an excellent job at running short-term rentals.
I don't want to live in a community with unlicensed businesses operating next door to my house. I want regulations and ordinances to be in effect that we can enforce and see results from.
Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Clark County anticipates opening its short-term rental application period in September, and it will remain open for 6 months. For any of the resources discussed on this show, including a link to frequently asked questions about Clark County short-term rental ordinance, go to our website, vegaspbs.org/Nevada Week, and please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at VegasPBS.